Hey there, this is TJR from Music Worth Buying, and you're probably already aware of the fact that Led Zeppelin IV and Houses of the Holy have been re-released this week in double CD deluxe editions. And so I'm going to be discussing my thoughts on the remaster, and also I'm going to discuss my thoughts on the bonus material as well. Now, I did one of these videos when Led Zeppelin 1 and 3 were re-released, I should say, a couple of months ago. And I have to say that my opinion hasn't really changed much in regards to the remastering. Personally, I don't hear enough sonic difference between these new remasterings and older pressings of the album. And in fact, I don't hear that much difference between the original 80s remasterings, maybe just very slight. I don't really feel like you can warrant rebuying these just for any improved audio quality. This is unlike my opinion about the 2009 Beatles remasters, where there was a huge difference between what you heard in the 2009 re-release versus the 80s original CD releases. I felt that there was a tremendous difference and they were worth buying it for that reason alone, along with, of course, all the bonus deluxe packaging that came with them and the little mini docs. So with that said now, if you already own these albums, once again, just like with the first three albums, I feel the only reason you might rebuy these is for that additional bonus disc and how you feel about those tracks. I also kind of feel like that, like the Pink Floyd re-releases that were done just a couple years ago, that they're kind of overcharging for these two disc editions. If you've never bought a Led Zeppelin album before, I suppose that $14.99 is a good price for a two-disc set. But if you're like most of us and you already own this album, I think that you should follow the example that was set by the last Beatle remasters, once again, and also the Hendrix remasters, where it came with expanded deluxe packaging and a bonus DVD, a documentary of the making of the album, and they only charged $9.99 for those. And I really feel like that's kind of the example you should follow as far as when you re-release these albums and you're asking fans to rebuy them. To get an additional bonus disc of material, especially if you don't feel like there's that huge of a difference between the audio quality for what you're rebuying. So anyway, so let's get on to the bonus discs. I've listened to both of these, both Led Zeppelin IV and Houses of the Holy, and I'm going to be discussing them. First of all, with Led Zeppelin IV, Black Dog and Rock and Roll feature alternate mixes. Black Dog is listed as basic track with guitar overdubs, and Rock and Roll as alternate mix. Now, these are not alternate takes. These are just more stripped down versions of the same tracks. You'll hear a little bit of difference with them, but I think that overall for enjoyment, you want to go with the studio tracks on these, but I don't think you hear that much difference. You just hear slightly more stripped down versions. Now, When the Levee Breaks is referred to as the alternate UK mix. No other information but that about it. It is a somewhat heavier mix of the original, and the drums have a different tone to them. It's still the same original recording, not an alternate recording. You will hear a difference when you place them side by side, but otherwise you won't notice it when you're listening to them separately. Now, Battle of Evermore has what's called the mandolin guitar mix from Headley Garage, and Going to California has what's called the mandolin guitar mix. Now, these are interesting. The vocals have been dropped out. And normally I'm kind of not too keen on what I call these karaoke tracks, where they just take out the vocals and let you hear the instrumentation. But as a guitarist, I like these because it really let me better examine the interplay between the guitar and the mandolin and how the two were arranged. And this is especially true of Going to California. In Going to California, you had Jimmy Page on acoustic guitar, you had John Paul Jones on the mandolin, and it's exquisite to hear this mix without the vocals and just hear the interplay of these two instruments. It's really beautiful sounding. I really enjoyed that. I also enjoyed, of course, Battle of Evermore. They had once again dropped the vocals out. This time it was Jimmy Page. If I'm understanding correctly, it was Jimmy Page on both acoustic guitar and the mandolin. And it's also interesting to hear, too, as a guitarist, I don't know how interesting it will be for you if you're not a guitarist or if you're not a musician. I don't know if you're going to get that much interest out of it or intrigue. Whereas the Going to California alternate mix without the vocals was enjoyable, just to listen to, even just enjoyable, as enjoyable as listening to the track with vocals. I don't know how much you're going to enjoy the other track, Battle of Evermore without vocals, except as once again as musicians go, that's interesting to see how that was put together. I hope that you do, even if you're not a musician, that you'll find some interest in that. Now, Stairway to Heaven has what's called the Sunset Sound Mix, and Misty Mountain Hop has just simply is listed as an alternate mix. In both of these are all once again the same original recordings, the same original track. They have a slightly orally different sound to them. Oral as in A-U-R-A-L, orally different tone to them. Slightly more reverb, perhaps on Stairway to Heaven. They're just subtle nuances, really subtle. You have to really compare them back to back to notice the differences. They're not startlingly different from each other. And I think that once you start listening to them, you won't really realize you're hearing anything different from the original recording that made it onto the album. Only back to back would you notice the difference. Four Sticks, however, also listed as an alternate mix, is startlingly different. The guitars sound much rougher and deeper. It's once again the exact same recording. It just tonally feels different. This one is well worth listening to. It's startlingly different from the original. So for me, on Led Zeppelin IV, the two standouts are Four Sticks and Going to California. So this brings us now to Houses of the Holy. And this starts out with, I'm going to discuss The Song Remains the Same, which is listed as a guitar overdub reference mix, and Over the Hills and Far Away, which is listed as guitar mix with backing tracks. Now, these both contain no vocals, have some of the guitar overdubs are removed on Over the Hills and Far Away. I like this one because once again it lets me examine how Page arranged his various guitar parts in the studio. Over the Hills and Far Away also removes the harpsichord fade up at the end and instead fades up on Jimmy Page just playing the opening guitar line on acoustic. Obviously this was just a reference for John Paul Jones to record his keyboard part. And Song Remains the Same. Once again, I also like, while there are, I think, some slight differences in the guitar solo, I think there's a different take of the guitar solo in there, and a lot of the guitar overdubs are removed. It lets me hear better how Page arranged his guitars. At this point, Jimmy Page was layering lots of guitars on top of each other. He was creating this kind of almost guitar orchestra sound. And so I like the fact that it lets me examine that a little bit better. Once again, if you're not a musician, I don't know how much interest you're going to have in that. Hopefully you will. The Rain song is listed as mix minus piano. Now it says minus piano, but there's still some piano in it, just not as much. So I'm assuming they overdubbed a second piano later, or maybe they removed that first piano and put the second one in. Everything else is the same, but this mix does let you once again hear a bit more of how Page is playing guitar on the song. I think that the Rain song is some of Jimmy Page's most inventive guitar work and inventive composing efforts on the guitar. Every time I listen to it, I'm kind of surprised how did he come up with this, I always say to myself. But once again, I'm a guitarist, so it's of interest to me. Hopefully it will be to you as well. The Crunge is listed as rough mix with keys up. And I hear only slight differences in the mix on both this and the final album version. The keys don't sound that much louder or that much more pronounced on either version, so I don't know why they say keys up. But I noticed Plant's vocals are drier in the mix. He still sounds great though, but you can definitely hear a little more presence, a little more reverb in the final version. Now, Dancing Days is listed as rough mix with vocals. This is an interesting mix to hear. I enjoyed this one quite a bit. It's beefier than what made it on the final album. The bass is played up a little more, and brought down is that lead guitar line, that da-na-na-na-na, is brought down more in the mix. So you hear the bass better, and it just has a beefier tone. I really enjoyed this mix as much as I enjoyed the final version. The Ocean is similar also, it's referred to as working mix. The bass is played up a bit more. It's a little less polished sounding, meatier sounding, and I kind of liked it a little bit better than the final version for that reason. Also is no quarter. This is listed as rough mix with JPJ, in other words, John Paul Jones, keyboard overdubs with no vocal. Now this mostly features John Paul Jones keyboards with most of Page's guitar removed also, along with the vocals. And I liked it because it lets you hear what John Paul Jones was doing on the keyboard. I feel like his keyboard playing is kind of overlooked when people evaluate Led Zeppelin. And I mentioned that in my in-depth analysis of Led Zeppelin I. And so also there was no alternate version or rough mix or anything with Dear Maker. That was the only song not included on the bonus disc. So with Led Zeppelin IV, you get the entire album with alternate mixes of the original album, and with Houses of the Holy, you get an alternate disc with the entire album minus anything with Dear Maker. Obviously, I'm guessing he had nothing really that he felt he had to share as far as any alternate mixes or alternate takes. What I feel is missing from these re-releases is any historical commentary on them. I have read about how Jimmy Page was not completely happy with the Sunset Sound mix of Stairway to Heaven, which is what's included on this disc, but I would have liked some info on where the rest of these mixes fit in historically. What did he feel was different or wrong with these mixes, and why he wants to include them now in these new remasters. And now the Beatles, they did this with the anthology series. The booklet that accompanied those discs, which featured, previous takes, alternate takes, early demos, rough mixes. The booklet went track by track and explained how these alternate and early mixes fit into the timeline before the finished product and why they were set aside. Also, I want to mention something. In the Beatles anthology series, for instance, there is a rendition of Eleanor Rigby that has the vocals dropped out. What's great about this is you get to hear how amazing the four-piece string section sounds. And also, you get to better understand the contribution made by George Martin, since he would have been the one who arranged the music for the string section. He would have written the sheet music arrangements for them to play. But it's made clear when you read the notes in this booklet that this mix is not historical in nature. It was created for this set. I have to wonder sometimes, when I listen to, for instance, on Led Zeppelin II, that remaster, the Whole Lotta Love rough mix with vocals, it has a different vocal track. It's entirely different vocal track. So clearly, this mix was part of the song's history. It was an earlier mix. It was an earlier take with a different vocal take on it. But what I'm a little unclear on was, say, for instance, Black Dog, the basic track with guitar overdubs. Was this an actual earlier working mix of the song prior to Jimmy Page, let me add on some more to this so this feels a little more finished? Or did Page just go into the studio in 2014, hit mute on a few of the overdub tracks, and say, okay, there we go. We'll call that basic track with overdubs. Was the Going to California mandolin guitar mix created for this release, or was it some historical earlier mix? It feels to me like it was created for this release, which is nothing wrong with that, so long as I just wish they'd make it clear, because it was enjoyable to hear, get a little bit of a glimpse, to see how Page arranged that, at least for me as a musician once again. Another thing that I feel was missing is I've read in interviews where, Jimmy Page says, I have the original recordings of me first coming up with the various musical ideas of Stairway to Heaven. And this is probably just him sitting there at the Bronyar Cottage and turning on a tape recorder, probably a reel-to-reel tape recorder, and playing into a microphone and just recording, kind of first getting these parts down on tape to just kind of, as like his musical notepad, so to speak. We heard this in the Beatles anthology series, where we heard John Lennon's original recording, his acoustic guitar and vocal demo of Strawberry Fields. And then right next to it, they juxtaposed it with a later version, not the one that was released, but a later version of it with more of a band sound, but not a finished version. And then finally, the closing part of the finished version but with it slightly mixed differently, so you could hear some of John's, what people always heard John saying, "I buried Paul." He was actually saying cranberry sauce. So we could kind of get a little audio history of the evolution of that song's writing and recording. And that would have been very cool to, I think, to put something together like that, where we hear, here's Jimmy Page first working out the guitar parts to Stairway to Heaven. And maybe you have to kind of do a little editing to put it in a slightly more listenable format, and a more abbreviated format, because who knows how long some of those recordings went on. But I think that would have been cool to put together. I think that would have been much more worth shelling out the money to rebuy the album again, especially if you don't feel, like me, that the remasterings are that big of a difference. So that sums up my thoughts on the remasters, and hopefully this information on the second disc helps you. Once again, if you don't own them already, I'd say $14.99, which is kind of what they're going for in most places right now, is a good price to pay for a 2 CD set. I don't think you lose any audio quality on these remasters with the original albums. But once again, if you already own them, the only reason I can see to purchase them is for that second disc. So hopefully this information has helped you. If you want to preview the second disc prior to purchasing, you can. I know that you can preview them on Spotify. I'm not sure if you can preview them on Beats, but if you have Beats Music, please comment on that. Once again, I've only listened to the CD remasters. I have not listened to the vinyl versions. And a lot of people told me that the vinyl versions, the re-releases of 1, 2, and 3 were quite good. And they thought it was a real improvement. So if you've listened to the vinyl versions of 4 and Houses of the Holy, let us know. Give us your thoughts. Anyways, that wraps this up, and I hope you found this information useful. Stay tuned. I'm going to be also posting very soon an in-depth analysis of Led Zeppelin IV, just like I did with Led Zeppelin I, so I hope you'll be looking for that too. And so, see you next time. Please subscribe to the channel.